Ignoring every survival instinct, a man alone in Alaska made an unthinkable choice. He let a freezing mother bear and her cubs onto his porch. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The thermometer read -35 degrees and kept dropping, the wind slicing through the air like a blade. In 5 years of living here, Ethan had never experienced such brutal cold. This wasn't just a storm, it was a battle for survival. His remote cabin, 4 hours from the nearest town, stood alone, against the fury of the Alaskan wilderness. Once a renowned wildlife photographer, Ethan had traded city life for solitude, but on this night he questioned if he had made a terrible mistake. The February morning had started like any other. Ethan woke to the soft crackle of burning wood in the fireplace, though the fading embers barely warmed the corners of his small cabin. Through frost-coated windows, he saw that another thick layer of snow had fallen overnight, burying the already deep drifts. At 40 years old, Ethan followed a strict routine, one that kept him alive in these relentless conditions. Each morning, he checked the weather radio, took stock of his supplies, and ensured his equipment was in working order. His walls were lined with photographs, wolves, moose, and bears he had once captured through his lens. Those images had graced the pages of major wildlife magazines, but after his wife's passing 3 years ago, he abandoned everything for this isolated existence. That morning, the weather report left him uneasy. A powerful storm was sweeping down from the north, bringing winds capable of toppling trees and a cold that could break records. If the forecast was right, he could be trapped for days, even weeks. He spent the daylight hours securing his generator and double-checking his backup heating system. In Alaska, even a minor oversight could mean death. His father's words echoed. In his mind, nature doesn't forgive carelessness, son. That lesson had saved him more times than he could count. By evening, the storm struck with relentless force. Snow fell in a blinding sheet, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Ethan added more logs to the fire and ran through his storm preparations. His satellite phone, the only lifeline to the outside world, was fully charged, resting beside his emergency radio. The nearest ranger station was 50 kilometers away, and in this weather, help wouldn't come for days. Night fell, and the storm roared outside, wind shrieking through every crack in the cabin's walls. Then, just past midnight, a sound broke through the howling wind, sending a jolt through Ethan's spine. A deep guttural noise barely audible through the storm, but unmistakable to a man who had spent years observing wildlife. A bear, and it was dangerously close. In February, bears should be deep in hibernation. If one was awake and active in such extreme conditions, something was terribly wrong. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and inched toward the window. His beam barely pierced the swirling snow, and visibility remained near zero. The thermometer now read -50 degrees, with the wind chill making it even worse. Then, through the whiteout, he saw them, 3 dark shapes emerging from the storm. A mother bear and 2 cubs, barely moving through the deep drifts. Even from outside, Ethan could see they were in dire straits. The mother's once powerful stride had weakened to a sluggish, exhausted shuffle. The cubs huddled close, their small bodies trembling against the brutal wind. Years of photographing wildlife had taught Ethan how to read animal behavior, and what he saw made his stomach tighten. The mother bear was desperate. Something had forced her from her den in the dead of winter, driving her and her cubs into a storm they couldn't possibly survive. The bears stumbled toward the cabin, seeking shelter from the merciless wind. In the flickering flashlight beam, Ethan saw their fur coated in thick ice. The cubs shivered uncontrollably, their fragile forms never meant to endure such cold. The mother's steps grew weaker, she was failing fast. Ethan's heart pounded as the bears neared his porch. Survival guides warned that bears near human dwellings were dangerous, but this situation was anything but normal. A desperate mother would do anything to protect her cubs. Now, only feet away, Ethan could see the cubs were much smaller than they should have been, likely born late in the season. Their chances of surviving the night were almost zero. The mother bear began pawing at the snow near the porch, trying to dig a shelter, but the wind erased her efforts in seconds. The temperature dropped so low that the cabin's thermometer froze solid. The mother fought to shield her cubs, but her strength was fading. One wrong choice could mean disaster, but doing nothing guaranteed their death. Ethan exhaled, his breath curling in the freezing air. Then, against every instinct, he reached for the door handle. The cub stumbled, sinking into the deep snow. The mother carefully lifted one, but its movements were sluggish, weakening by the second. They had been fighting to stay alive for nearly an hour, and their condition was deteriorating fast. The second cub collapsed, and this time it took much longer to rise. The mother's attempts to help were growing feeble, her own strength fading. A low moan escaped her, a sound of pure despair that cut through the storm and sent a chill through Ethan's core. The bears pressed against his porch, desperate for shelter from the relentless wind. The cubs barely moved, their shivering slowing, a dangerous sign of hypothermia. The mother's eyes, glazed from the cold, met Ethan's through the swirling snow. In the glow of his flashlight, he saw their small bodies trembling less and less. Every instinct screamed at him to stay inside, to follow the rules of survival. But could he really just stand there and watch them freeze to death? Sorry to interrupt, but before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to us, thank you. The cubs had nearly stopped moving. The mother bear draped herself over them, trying in vain to block the cold with her own failing body. Then her eyes met Ethan's again, and what he saw shook him to his core. There was no aggression, no threat, only exhaustion, desperation, and something eerily close to surrender. Attached to his cabin was a storage room, separate from his living space, well insulated, and filled with his old photography gear. It could serve as a temporary shelter. But bringing 3 freezing bears inside, that was madness. If the mother panicked, she could destroy the cabin, leaving Ethan trapped in the storm with no protection. And yet, the cubs were barely breathing. The mother's heavy body sagged into the snow, her eyes fluttering closed. In a few more minutes, it would be too late. Ethan sprang into action. He cranked up the heaters in the storage room, warming it as fast as possible. He grabbed blankets, stacking them near the door. Through the window, the mother bear's gaze followed his every move. And in that moment, Ethan didn't see a dangerous predator. He saw a mother fighting with everything she had left to save her children. Outside, the wind howled, the temperature still dropping. The clock read 2 a.m., the coldest, darkest hour of the night. Ethan took a deep breath, then grasped the door handle. The hinges groaned as he pushed it open, the sound sharp in the frozen silence. A blast of icy wind rushed inside, swirling snow across the floor. Just a few steps away, the bears lay half buried in the drifts. Moving slowly, deliberately, Ethan stepped onto the porch. The mother bear's eyes gleamed in the dim light. She registered his presence, but she didn't move, her body too drained to react. Her nostrils flared slightly, catching his scent. Ethan kept his voice low and calm as he worked, clearing a narrow path from the porch to the storage room. "It's okay," he murmured, knowing she wouldn't understand but needing to say it anyway. The mother didn't flinch, didn't growl, just watched. The cubs remained still, nearly buried in the deepening snow. Time was running out. Even for Ethan, standing out here for too long was a risk. He had to act, now or not at all. With shaking hands, he threw the storage room door open. Warm air spilled into the night, instantly turning to mist in the freezing cold. The mother bear stirred. Her nostrils flared wider as she caught the scent of heat, her first real movement in nearly an hour. Ethan's heart pounded as he inched forward, blankets in hand. The mother tracked his every step, but her protective instincts seemed dulled by exhaustion. When he reached the cubs, he carefully draped a blanket over their small bodies. The mother tensed. Ethan froze, barely breathing. His life now depended on her next move. Instead of attacking, the mother bear slowly lowered her head and sniffed the blanket wrapped around her cubs, as if she understood its purpose. Ethan placed another blanket closer to the storage room door, creating a path toward warmth. His fingers were going numb, and he knew he couldn't stay outside much longer. Everything now depended on the mother bear's next move. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled from exhaustion. The cubs remained motionless beneath the blanket. With a gentle nudge, she pressed her nose against one of them. No response. A sorrowful moan escaped her, raw and full of a mother's fear, cutting through the howling wind. Ethan slowly backed toward the open storage room door, letting the warmth spill into the night. The promise of shelter was irresistible in the brutal cold. The mother bear gathered the last of her strength. With great effort, she pushed herself up, every movement slow and painful. For a moment she swayed in the wind, torn between fear and instinct. Then, with infinite tenderness, she gripped the blanket in her teeth and began pulling her cubs toward the door. The fabric helped them slide over the snow, but every step drained her remaining energy. Her muscles trembled with effort. Yet her motherly instinct drove her forward. The distance was only a few steps, but it felt like miles. Ethan stood motionless, barely daring to breathe as the bear family inched toward safety. Finally, they reached the doorway. At the entrance, the mother bear hesitated, her massive form filling the frame. Steam rose from her fur as warmth met the freezing air. This was the most dangerous moment. If she panicked inside the small space, there would be no escape, but survival outweighed fear. Summoning the last of her strength, she pulled the cubs over the threshold. Ethan watched as the mother bear collapsed beside them, wrapping her body around the cubs to share her warmth. Carefully, he closed the storage room door. Through the small window, he saw them huddled together, clinging to the life-saving heat. The mother's eyes remained open, watching him warily, but as warmth seeped through her frozen fur, her body slowly relaxed. For the next several hours, Ethan kept watch through the window that connected the storage room to his living space. Outside, the storm reached its peak, shaking the cabin walls. But inside, something incredible was happening. The cubs were the first to stir. At first, their movements were weak, barely noticeable. But as the warmth revived them, they began to shift and stretch. The mother bear gently sniffed each cub, as if reassuring herself that they were alive. By sunrise, they were moving freely again, their natural curiosity returning. They stayed close to their mother, but with each passing, their movements became more playful. The storm raged for 2 more days. During that time, Ethan carefully placed food and water near the storage room door. The mother bear, though wary at first, accepted his help. Little by little, her caution turned into something closer to trust. On the 3rd morning, the storm finally passed. Outside, the world had transformed into a glistening landscape of snow and ice. But the temperature was rising, and for the first time in days, the sun broke through the clouds. Ethan knew the moment had come. The bears had to return to the wild. As if sensing it, the mother bear grew restless, her instincts pulling her back to the forest. With the same care he had shown on that desperate night, Ethan opened the outer door of the storage room. Fresh air and sunlight poured in. The mother bear lifted her head, sniffing the change in the air. Slowly, she pushed herself to her feet, strong and magnificent once more. Nothing like the desperate, freezing creature she had been 3 nights. At the doorway, she paused. She turned her head toward Ethan, who stood a respectful distance away. For a long moment, their eyes met. And in that silent exchange, there was something beyond fear, beyond survival, an unspoken understanding. Then, with surprising grace, she turned and led her cubs back into the wild. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching them disappear into the endless white. The forest swallowed their dark shapes as they grew smaller against the endless white. Then, just before vanishing into the trees, the mother bear paused. She turned her head one last time, as if taking one final look at the man who had saved her family. Then, without hesitation, she disappeared into the wilderness with her cubs, leaving only a trail of paw prints in the snow. 6 months later, on a warm August afternoon, Ethan was driving back to his cabin after a rare trip to town for supplies. His old pickup truck rumbled along the winding mountain road, dust rising in its wake. After the brutal winter, the past few months had been filled with long photography sessions, capturing nature's slow but steady awakening. As he rounded a bend, a massive bear suddenly stepped onto the road. Ethan slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded, and the truck came to a shuddering stop just inches from a tree. Gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled fingers, he stared at the enormous creature blocking his path. The bear stood still, watching him. There was something strangely familiar about her stance, the way she held her head, the quiet intelligence in her gaze. Could it really be her? No. It seemed impossible, but the longer he looked, the more certain he became. It was the same mother bear he had saved during the storm. Then a deep rumbling filled the air. The ground beneath Ethan's truck trembled. A sudden crash made him jolt. Just ahead, a massive chunk of rock broke away from the cliffside, slamming onto the road with an earth-shaking impact. If not for the bear stopping him, he would have been directly in its path. Ethan exhaled shakily, his pulse pounding in his ears. He looked back toward the bear, but she was already retreating into the trees, her dark shape blending into the wilderness. She had saved his life, just as he had once saved hers. Taking a deep breath, Ethan turned his truck around and took the longer route home. Some moments aren't just meant for a photograph. Some moments stay with you forever. Did you enjoy this story? Do you believe animals remember kindness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion lead to the most extraordinary surprises. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Have an amazing day.